Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Late Night Learning. I am your host, Dr. Anthony Palomba. Today we're going to be going through methods defense. This is a particular subject in which we are getting after what it means to defend a particular method in research. And so you might envision a scenario in which you might be in some sort of business presentation. You've run correlations, you've run t-tests, you've run linear regressions, factor analyses, cluster analyses, even a conjoint analysis. And you might say to yourself, I've got all of these great insights. I have statistically significant evidence. How do I present this to people who may not be familiar with what I've done? This is difficult to kind of process at the end of a business presentation, draft, or project, because you've done all of this work, but now you kind of have to slow down and walk it back and think to yourself, how am I going to reach people? How am I going to explain what I've done here for people who are not familiar with what I've done? Remember, for some people, running a linear regression or logistic regression or factor analyses is similar to alchemy. They think it's pure magic, and they don't have the statistical background necessary to properly digest what you've done and to be able to filter it through previous experiences. And so while sharing evidence, you also have to be mindful of the lowest common denominator in the room. The lowest common denominator in the room may be somebody who is not familiar with the statistical analyses that you've run. They may not be familiar with why and how you did what you did. This brings us to thinking about audiences and thinking about how we can bring our audience along step by step throughout the course of our business presentation, along with the logic that we've instilled within the project. I did this because of this, and then we found this, and so we went over here. If we can begin to think about every slide, starting with another step in the process that you took to get to the final answer or evidence that you're going to show your audience will appreciate it more. Because you've taken them on the ride, the very same ride that you took in creating this particular project, running through the analyses that you selected, and coming through with the conclusions and recommendations that you did. They'll also be able to see how meticulous, fastidious, and technical you've been throughout the particular project. And so there's actually quite a bit here that you can demonstrate to your audience by bringing them along with your logical flow. So we're going to be covering a few of these elements in this particular lecture. So without further ado, let's get started. So here you can see I've got this metaphor here, and this is a video in which you can see a hockey player with a puck and a goalie. And so the goalie itself, or himself, is serving as kind of a metaphor here in which we can see that in a method defense, when somebody has a particular question for you that may question why you picked survey or focus group method or in-depth interview method or machine learning method, you as the goalie should be able to anticipate where somebody may fire a shot at you and block it. And by blocking it, we're not saying that we're telling the audience that they're wrong, but what we are saying is expect questions and people to interrogate your processes. And be prepared to have answers to defend why you did what you did in your study. This will show foresight, this will show reflection on your part, this will show your intimacy with the data set, intimacy with the methods that you thought were appropriate, and it'll really demonstrate how much of an expert you truly are in this vein. All of these together really do support a very cogent, strong, and persuasive project. Anybody can execute a study, but to be able to execute a study soundly, with clear, sound logic, and evidence to support your decisions, is absolutely paramount in rising to this occasion. And this occasion usually comes up during Q&A sessions. Let's keep going. So methods consumption. You might want to consider how your audience may consume your research. Very much in line with a sandwich, we have to think about what they're going to be tasting, touching, feeling, seeing. Does the sandwich itself, its appearance, match the taste profile, so to speak? You may title your study or presentation in one way, but if it comes off another way, or if it deviates from the thesis that you put up in the front of your study, or deviates from the bluff that you've put up in your study, this is going to alarm some audience members. And so you want to think about what is their previous experience with a BLT, let's say, or some sort of favorite sandwich that you may have. If it's their first time trying a Chipotle chicken sandwich, well, you might have to kind of walk them through what it is and what its flavors are and components are and taste profiles are. And maybe you have the sandwich at the end. But to the experienced Chipotle chicken sandwich person, you may give them the sandwich up front. Why? Because they have previous experience with the sandwich and they will be able to determine if this is a good variation of the sandwich. Similarly, in research, if your audience is very close to the business problem or threat, or if they're very familiar with statistics, you may be able to give them a bluff up front and then walk them through your project. There will be less questions about what your particular recommendation is about because you'll be able to go right into the statistics themselves. Differently, if people are not familiar with statistics, you may have to do a greater amount of walkthrough as you're walking through your study and then provide your audience with said bluff, although at this point it would be a recommendation at the end of the presentation. You want to think about who is in the audience and aim for the lowest common denominator. Now, this is a reference back to the introduction in which we were talking about thinking of who is in the room and what their statistical acumen may be. If nobody knows anything about a mean, median, mode, or range, you're in trouble. Nobody knows what a p-value is, or a regression, or a beta value. You may also need to take a step back to say, how can I break this down further for the audiences? Please write this down. Please note this. Please write this somewhere. There is no quicker way to lose your audience than to make them feel stupid or angry. You can do that quite easily by not breaking down a model. People will be turned off. Nobody likes to be reminded that they don't know something or feel inferior. Give your audience slack and think about ways in which you can distill complex information to them. It's a courtesy to your audience, and they'll be terribly, terribly appreciative of it. Let's keep going. Using stories to explain methods. This is really a great way to break down a regression or a logistic regression or neural networks or something else that you may be running. You will come across audiences that are just simply unfamiliar with your business analytics training. It will be up to you to convey what you mean to tell your audience without losing them. And as I said earlier, and I'm going to repeat this, there is no quicker way to lose an audience member than to make them feel stupid, confused, or ignorant. Be mindful of this as you walk your audience along. Let's keep going. You are still a mentor. Yes, we remember this from our previous sessions. You cannot leave any pupils or students behind in your discussion. Continue to question whether someone unfamiliar with your skill set will understand your results. And this is paramount to your success as a business analytics consultant, expert, professional. You want to remind yourself constantly, you are the mentor when you are presenting in front of people. You're not the hero. Remember, the hero is in the audience. The hero is in the audience. After your business presentation, you are spurring your audience to action. You are spurring your audience to go do something based on the results of your particular study. Don't slow down at the end. If anything, find a second wind. The last slide that you have is really the final firecracker, the final startup to get people motivated to go do something. You want to be very careful here. You want to be sure that you take on the risks that they're feeling, the hesitancies, the fears, the trepidations they may have in taking on some new business opportunity or grappling with some new business threat. You're asking a lot from your audience. Be absolutely sure that you can move and migrate your audience along from slide to slide. Be sure that you consider what your audience is thinking, feeling, reflecting on at every stage of your business presentation. It's very much similar to a stand-up comedy routine. If you've ever heard a comedian reflect on an hour of stand-up comedy, I myself am a huge fan of stand-up comedy, they'll always talk about where's the audience at this point. What have I said? What am I going to say? And how is what I've said previously going to affect what I'm about to say? A half hour in, 40 minutes in. Now, you may not be presenting that long, but in the first few minutes of your business presentation, what you say there lays the foundation for what you cover in a few minutes. Be sure you reflect on how people are feeling and thinking throughout your business presentation. We've been preaching this since the beginning of this program. We want to be sure that we are being reflected, we are reflecting about what is going on at each point. Let's keep going. Preparing for your defense. It's absolutely important and crucial that you practice and prepare for your defense. You want to be sure that you're looking around a room, you're practicing making eye contact with random objects if that's what it takes. You might practice in front of a mirror. You might practice in front of others. You might record yourself. You might do what I do, which is what I'm doing right now, practicing for an upcoming lecture for business analytics students by recording this presentation and seeing where I can get better. When we have this particular mindset in place, it really aids us in being able to effectively present and proof our projects such that we can begin to anticipate where there may be limitations. We can begin to anticipate where there may be questions. We can begin to anticipate where people will fall in love with what you're saying, and where people won't be so happy about what you're saying. The further intimacy that you can gain and engage with in your presentation, it'll strengthen your presentation and defense. Let's keep going. Deconstruct and decompose. You want to think about, how did you get to the results? What were the steps that you took to examine the business opportunity or threat? Why did you run the statistical technique in the first place? How well do you understand the technique and its application? You want to think about the ingredient steps in your dish, because ultimately, if somebody is looking for a cheeseburger at the end of this, you have to set them through how you procured the ground beef, the cheese, tomatoes, ketchup, and any other accoutrements you may be putting on the burger. You also want to think about principles first thinking if you want to walk your audience through what you did and then give them your recommendation, or executing an applications first thinking, which is essentially your bluff. Your bottom line up front, what you think people should do right on the second slide, and then walk them through your logic. You also want to consider, what assumptions will your audience have? What holes are there in your study? Be brave. Be courageous in isolating the holes in your study. Everybody has limitations in their study. I have been published in numerous business and media journals. I promise you, none of my studies are perfect. And I promise you, there are limitations and there are assumptions in my studies. We have to be transparent. That is another way to properly defend a method, is by being transparent, pointing out limitations, pointing out assumptions that you had. If you can be barefaced about this and speak to them before your audiences raise them as issues, you will come across as a greater expert. Let's keep going. Data visualization. We've talked about this previously in isolating colors and using different mechanisms to highlight contrasts and comparisons in data. You want to be sure with whatever you've put together, it should be clean, clear, and have strong meaning up front, much like these two pieces of art that I have here. It should enhance understanding of a model or technique. It should be clear and decluttered. Its purpose should be clear. The audience should be able to get in and out quickly. I regularly preach this with slides. If it takes your audience more than 5 seconds to figure out what is on a slide, what the takeaway is, it's too long. That means you need to consider breaking your slide down differently. And perhaps it may be a decluttering issue. Let's keep going. So, consulting example, this is something I did for WWE a few years ago. I won't be sharing the results, but what I can do is show you how I explained a rather complex technique to them that I used to make sure nobody felt stupid when I was presenting this, and to make sure everybody was with me for the ride, right? We want to make sure everybody is with us, we all understand each other, and nobody feels left behind. Let's keep going. So I had run a conjoint analysis, and I had looked at over-the-top TV bundles, and I'll leave it at that. And so there were results that I shared with WWE. So I used a slide first here to kind of break down what a conjoint is and the goal and et cetera, et cetera. I did this because I wanted to be upfront about what this analysis is, what it means, and empower my audience to share this project with others. Because if people understand the business analytics that you ran, if they understand the presentation that you gave, if they understand all facets of the presentation itself, people are inclined to share. And that's really good for you. So you want to be sure that your method is clear. One way to do this is, before you get into statistical analyses, is to be upfront and explain what the method is. So here up front, I won't read everything here, but here up front in the first bullet point, participants make product trade-offs all the time. For instance, some people are more worried about price in an OTT bundle, while others are worried about content or channel access. How much do participants value these product attributes? A conjoint analysis is a quasi-experiment in which participants are asked to evaluate product trade-offs to understand the equity or value behind each product trade-off. And then I mentioned the goal here, and then I mentioned a product attribute could be price, and it has levels, right? Levels are different prices here. So this was a nice way to just take a pause before I went into the analysis to say, I want to make sure everybody is on board with me. No audience member left behind. Let's keep going. Breakdown of measurements, so level of preference. So here, this considers how respondents rate each alternative or variation. So I actually used ice cream as an example here to the people at WWE to help them understand level of preference. So down here, we can see at the last bullet point, people could rate vanilla, chocolate, mint, all as a score of 9 out of 10, right? I have a scale here, 0, lowest rating, 10 being the highest. All levels can be scored the same. Level of preference allows for that. Let's keep going. Here, utility constant sum is different, because people are given 100 points to allocate and it forces people to make trade-off decisions about how much they value different attributes. And if we're thinking of ice cream, people may think about different product attributes such as ice cream flavor, price, the brand of the ice cream, and texture of the ice cream. The more points that are allocated to a product attribute, the more the attribute is valued by the participant. You can quickly see here, nobody's really left behind, right? Of course, I'm not sharing the results here because I can't, but at the very least, you can see it's clear, it's concise, it's easy to follow along, nobody's left behind. And that's what's most critical here. Nobody is left behind. Let's keep going. There's more engagement when people are with us. So I want you to think about, with multiple linear regression, which you've learned about, how would you break that down for your audience or for a client? I just gave an analogy, a little story about ice cream to help people in the audience understand what a conjoint analysis is so that they're not left behind, that everybody understands what the purpose of it is. So how might we explain multiple linear regression? Well, we know that a multiple linear regression deals with several independent variables that predict the variance in a dependent variable. Okay. Is there a story that people can relate to? What about this? It's actually a gorgeous day out right now in White Plains, New York. It's sunny. It's warm. What about if we looked at what influences people to wear a lot of clothes? Okay, so that could be a model, right? Our dependent variable could be how many layers of clothing people are wearing, right? Okay. What might influence that? Well, one independent variable that could influence the amount of clothing you wear is temperature, right? Temperature is definitely going to influence that. Wind speed, right? Wind could certainly influence the amount of clothing that you're wearing. And 3, humidity. Humidity could also influence the amount of clothing that you're wearing. So really, a multiple linear regression looks at multiple factors that can determine how much or how little clothing people wear in this particular example. For other things, a multiple linear regression can help explain how several independent variables influence how much a dependent variable increases or decreases in variation. It's useful because it helps us understand how much each individual independent variable numerically contributes to the variance within the dependent variable. Going back to our clothing example, is temperature more predictive of how much clothing people will wear, or is it really wind speed that's a stronger predictor? That's why a multiple linear regression is useful. You can quickly see here with this story, I spent about 2 minutes on this, 3 minutes. This is super helpful for an audience who is just simply unfamiliar or doesn't have a statistics background to understand a model. Everybody's with us, nobody's meant to feel stupid or left behind, and everybody is further engaged, right? And you're also providing them opportunities to understand how and why a multiple linear regression is run, and they may be able to explain it to others, which is what you want, because if they can explain it to others, chances are they're going to share your study, which is also empowering for you. Let's keep going. A factor analysis. How would you explain a factor analysis to a non-BA person, a non-business analytics person, somebody with no stats background whatsoever? How would you explain that? Well, what you could say something along the lines of, well, a factor analysis deals with often looking at a long list of attributes. Not always, but mostly. And so a researcher may look at a long list of personality traits that people evaluate for a car. Is the car sexy, smooth, sleek, modern, conservative, liberal, fun, engaging? Okay, well, those are a lot of personality traits. You could look at 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50. Well, that's kind of a lot. It's a lot to sift through. I need to know which personality traits vary with each other and kind of create individual profiles. If I want to find which attributes vary with each other and are kind of related to each other and create different profiles and reduce the amount of statements necessary to describe a car, or in this case, reduce the amount of personality traits necessary to describe a car, I might run a factor analysis. It's useful because we have less and less to worry about, less and less personality traits that are figured into the final analyses. So again, you can quickly see here that in a few minutes' time, I've been able to break down something that's rather complicated and remarkably unfamiliar to those who are not familiar with this at all. When we consider telling little mini stories about large statistical modeling techniques and things that might fly over the heads of others, it's a courtesy to your audience to say, this is something you may not be familiar with, but I want you to be with me. I want you to understand what I'm talking about, and I want to empower you. I'm taking time out to empower you, to make you feel as though you are part of this presentation. You have a similar lens as I do to look at the evidence, to look at the results. When we do those things, we're able to have greater audience engagement and reception with the results that we proclaim at the end of our presentation. Well, that's all the time we have on Late Night Learning. As always, keep laughing and keep learning.